Steps 4 and 5, deciding what kind of help to give and implementing the decision. The fourth and fifth decision steps involve deciding what to do and implementing the chosen course of action. Although the first three steps in the Latané and Darley model have received careful empirical scrutiny and support, these last two steps have not been the focus of much research. That is, most of the studies of bystanders' responses in emergencies have examined whether or not people will do something, but not what that something is. The research that does exist, however, supports these last parts of the model. A significant proportion of college students are trained in first aid procedures. Shotland and Heinold, 1985, considered the question of whether this knowledge would actually make people more effective helpers. In the context of the Latané and Darley model, will bystanders with first aid training be better able to decide what to do, step 4, and then act effectively on that decision, step 5? In Shotland and Heinold's experiment, bystanders who did or did not have previous first aid training encountered an emergency in which the victim appeared to have profuse arterial bleeding. Consistent with the first two steps of the model, the clearer the emergency was at the onset, the more likely it was for a bystander to do something. In addition, bystanders without first aid training were just as likely to do something as were bystanders with this background. First aid training, however, had a significant impact on what these bystanders did. Consistent with the fourth and fifth steps, people with first aid training offered help with greater medical effectiveness than did those without training. In fact, the assistance given by people without training would often have been medically harmful had the victim's emergency been real. Ineffective assistance can also be harmful to the helper. Clark and Ward, 1974, found that people who had little experience with electricity would sometimes inadvertently jeopardize their own lives while attempting to help a victim who had apparently been severely shocked. These participants ran over and impulsively touched the victim who was still touching a live electrical wire. If the situation had been real, this action would have been both ineffective for the victim and deadly for the bystander. Thus, the last two steps of the Latané and Darley model are critical. Bystanders must decide what to do and know how to do it before intervention is truly helpful. Summary: the decision tree model of bystander intervention proposes that before a bystander actually intervenes on behalf of a victim, he or she makes a set of sequential decisions. Is something wrong? Is it an emergency? Is it my responsibility to offer help? What kind of help should I give? How should I give it? These decisions are influenced by the situation in which the emergency occurs, the nature of the emergency, the presence of other bystanders and their reactions, and social norms and rules. Overall, the Latané and Darley decision model of intervention provides a valuable framework for understanding when bystanders will or will not help others in need. The research guided by the Latané and Darley model has been important for several reasons. First, it illustrates the contribution that social psychology can make to understanding real-world problems. First impressions can be wrong. Public outrage portrayed the bystanders in the Kitty Genovese incident as apathetic, uncaring, and basically abnormal, but the social psychological research revealed a very different explanation. Through careful analysis and research, Latané and Darley, and the researchers who followed their pioneering efforts, showed how behaviors that might appear so abnormal can be understood using principles of normal behavior. People in situations such as the Kitty Genovese attack are not apathetic. They are caring, involved, and aroused. The problem is that these situations are complex and confusing, and bystanders must make a series of decisions, make them quickly, and make them in a very specific way before they will intervene. Second, although public response focused on questions of human nature, Latané and Darley emphasized the unrecognized importance of the nature of the situation. These studies illustrate the tremendous impact of situations, including the social aspects of the situation, on how people interpret an emergency and their decision about whether to respond to it personally. A consistent finding is that people are unduly influenced by the actions of others and situational standards under these circumstances. Why are people so easily influenced in these situations? One answer involves the nature of emergencies. As noted earlier, emergencies are unusual events associated with confusion and uncertainty. As a consequence, people rely on the most readily available cues to help them understand the situation and how they should behave in it. Moreover, because of the time pressure involved and the intense emotional reactions that people often have to the distress of others, emergencies are highly arousing. As we consider more fully in the next chapter, arousal leads people to become more focused on immediate and salient aspects of their situation, such as the actions of others around them, often to the exclusion of other cues to which they would normally attend. Thus, bystanders in emergencies may appear to overreact to immediate cues and make decisions that seem irrational to detached observers. This line of research does not imply that human nature is irrelevant to understanding prosocial behavior, as we have discussed in Chapter 2. Instead, it convincingly demonstrates that the power of the situation should not be underestimated in explanations concerning when people help and when they do not. Third, although the Latine and Darley model was initially developed to understand how people respond in emergencies that require immediate assistance, aspects of the model have been successfully applied to a wide variety of situations, including giving someone directions, receiving help from internet chat rooms, preventing someone from driving drunk, deciding whether to donate a kidney to a relative, reporting wrongdoing or improprieties on the job, whistleblowing, and deciding whether to report suspected child abuse. The model provides an analytical framework for understanding some other general findings regarding helping behavior. For example, one of the initial explanations for the apparent bystander apathy in the Kitty Genovese case focused on where the incident occurred, metropolitan New York City. The argument was that urban living makes people insensitive to the needs of others. Indeed, social psychological research does indicate that people are less helpful, at least to strangers, in urban than in rural environments across a range of different countries, e.g. the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. But what specifically is it about these situations that might make people in cities less likely to help than people in smaller towns? The Latine and Darley model suggests places to look for explanations. One possible explanation, relating to the first step in the Latine and Darley model, is that because cities are busy places full of noise and activity, people in urban environments are simply less likely to notice that something is wrong than are people in quieter, rural environments. To reduce stimulation to a manageable and comfortable level, people may try to restrict their attention to only those aspects of the environment that are most personally important and to block out irrelevant stimulation, Milgram 1970, which may involve the needs of other people. As a consequence, the problems of strangers may go largely unnoticed. Indeed, consistent with this stimulus overload hypothesis, conditions that tax people's senses tend to reduce their prosocial responsiveness to others. For example, Levine, Martinez, Brace, and Sorensen, 1994, assessed the helpfulness of people in 36 U.S. cities in terms of variety of everyday behaviors. 3 experimenters traveled to these different cities and to various locations in each city to stage a number of potential helping situations. For example, they accidentally dropped pens as they walked along city streets, or they wore leg braces and dropped magazines they were carrying on the sidewalk. They also dressed in dark glasses and carried a cane to portray a blind person trying to cross the street. In some cases, experimenters left lost letters on the street to see if they would be mailed. In others, they directly asked for change for a quarter or for a donation to the United Way. What kinds of cities are helpful and which ones are not? The cities, listed in order of the most to the least prosocial, are presented in Table 3.1. One of the strongest predictors of helpfulness was the population density of the city. Cities that were more densely populated ranked lower in helpfulness. Also consistent with this stimulus overload explanation, Bickman et al. 1973 found that students living in high-density, high-rise dormitories were less likely to return a lost letter than were similar students who lived in less densely populated buildings. Direct evidence for the role of attentiveness to others' needs, the process implicated in the second step of the Latané and Darley model, comes from a clever field study by Matthews and Cannon, 1975. In this experiment, a Confederate wearing or not wearing a cast dropped several boxes of books a few feet in front of a person walking along the street. The key manipulation of environmental stimulation was whether or not a nearby power lawnmower was running when this event occurred. People in the control condition without the mower running were very responsive to the need of the person in the cast, spontaneously helping 80% of the time. However, those who were overstimulated by the loud noise helped only 15% of the time, the same proportion who helped a non-handicapped person in both conditions. These findings suggest that excessive stimulation can reduce the likelihood that people will realize that help is needed, which according to the Latané and Darley model, prevents the bystander from moving on to the next decision step. If people do not notice or recognize that something is wrong, they will not help. Table 3.1, Helpfulness of U.S. Cities. So New York is really low on the list. And Houston, Texas is much more helpful, which they definitely have a much lower population density. Another possible explanation for why people are less helpful in cities than in smaller towns involves different social norms about how one should behave in these different environments. This influence relates to the third step in the Latané and Darley model, that is, deciding whether to take personal responsibility for helping. Specifically, small towns and large cities are generally believed to have different norms concerning helping. At least in terms of stereotypes, residents of small communities are expected to be helpful and socially supportive, whereas urban dwellers are expected to be unhelpful and insensitive to the needs of others. Consistent with the normative explanation, even in situations in which a person's need is made clear and potential helpers are explicitly asked for assistance, people tend to be less helpful in urban than in rural settings. Similarly, Foss, 1983, found that proportionally more blood was donated on smaller college campuses. Piliavin and Libby, 1985, found that the level of blood donation in Wisconsin communities was directly related to perceived social norms. Thus, urban and larger social environments lead to decreased helping relative to rural and smaller environments, not only as a consequence of coping with stimulus overload, i.e., not noticing events, but also because people seem less concerned about the needs of others once these needs are recognized. The Latané and Darley model does not present a complete picture, however. There are situations in which bystanders will not intervene, even though the need of a victim is apparent and the personal focus of responsibility is clear. Some of these are fairly obvious. For example, the greater the personal danger to the helper, the less likely people are to help. To account for these additional factors influencing helping, frameworks such as the cost-reward analysis have been developed. The basic assumption of this perspective on helping is that when bystanders decide on what actions to take, they try to minimize costs and maximize rewards. The cost-reward analysis in some ways serves to fine-tune some of the processes outlined by Latané and Darley. That is, a cost-reward analysis allows a more fine-grained analysis of how the nature of the situation and characteristics of the victim influence helping. The cost-reward analysis can thus be viewed as a complementary perspective to the Latané and Darley decision model, rather than as an alternative or competing framework. A cost-reward analysis. A cost-reward analysis of helping assumes an economic view of human behavior. People are motivated to maximize rewards and to minimize their costs. From this perspective, people are relatively rational and mainly concerned about their self-interest. In a potential helping situation, a person analyzes the circumstances, weighs the probable costs and rewards of alternative courses of action, and then arrives at a decision that will result in the best personal outcome. This is one form of egoism, which was discussed briefly in the first chapter. There are two basic categories of costs and rewards, those for helping and those for not helping. Costs for helping can involve lost time, effort, danger, embarrassment, and disruption of ongoing activities. However, helping can also be rewarding. Rewards for helping may include money, fame, self-praise, avoidance of guilt, thanks from the victim, and the intrinsic pleasure derived from having helped. Helping is more likely to occur when the rewards for helping outweigh the costs. Anything that lowers the costs or increases the rewards for helping enhances a person's inclination to help. Costs for not helping may involve feelings of guilt and the cognitive and emotional discomfort associated with knowing another person is suffering. Helping is more likely as these costs increase. One advantage of the cost-reward approach is that once potential costs and rewards have been identified, the effects of this combination of factors can readily be predicted. In the next section, we examine a variety of situational dimensions that influence costs and rewards and thus helping, typically in circumstances in which the need for help is clear. Costs and rewards for helping. The negative value associated with the costs for helping and the positive value associated with rewards for helping are subjective ones. They are based on the perceptions of the bystander, not on objective assessments of uninvolved outsiders. Therefore, to address this issue, most researchers have attempted to set up situations in which most people's perceptions of costs and rewards will be similar. Researchers have identified several situational factors that yield similar cost estimates from different people. Table 3.2 summarizes these and how they influence helping. Effort and time. Earlier in this chapter, we reviewed several experiments in which people witnessed emergencies in which the victim's screams made it appear that they were seriously injured. See Figure 3.2. Participants in these experiments were near the victim, and it was relatively easy to help. These are situations in which the personal costs for helping, in terms of time and effort, are outweighed by the combination of rewards for helping, praise and potential fame, and costs for not helping, the victim dying. As you recall, helping is very likely under these circumstances. In other situations, however, bystanders' own concerns and time pressures may prevail over the needs of another person. Bystanders weigh the needs of the victim and their own needs and goals, and then decide whether helping is too costly in that circumstance. This decision is based on a relatively rational assessment of the situation, and a person who fails to help is not necessarily a bad person. For example, Darley and Batson, 1973, conducted a study in which seminary students, presumably good people, were asked to make a presentation on some topic. Half were to talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan. The talk was to be given in another building, and time pressure was manipulated by leading the participants to believe that they were either early, on time, or late for their presentations. On their way to give the speech, the seminarians passed a person who was slumped in a doorway. The seminarians who were early for their presentations were the most likely to help, and those who were late were least likely to help. Those who thought that they were late not only hurried past the victim, but also often stepped over him. The costs of helping associated with time pressure made these otherwise good people less responsive to the needs of others. Helping others can also involve the risk of direct personal harm or negative emotional reactions, or, in some situations, carry with it social stigmatization. These are all important costs that deter helping. Table 3.2 Examples of costs and rewards associated with helping and not helping. Costs and rewards for helping. Cost for helping. Psychological aversion. Situations involving someone, e.g. a drunk, or something, e.g. blood, that people find unpleasant. Possible physical harm. High likelihood that direct intervention may be dangerous, e.g. possible personal attack, or painful, e.g. possible electric shock, to the helper. Effort and time. Helping that involves the interruption or postponement of important or desired activity, e.g. missing a scheduled appointment. Money expended or foregone. Helping that is perceived as being more financially costly, e.g. giving $25 instead of $1. Social disapproval. Intervention that requires breaking a social rule, e.g. going someplace that is prohibited, violating group norms to help. Reward for helping. Monetary compensation. Promise of higher financial reward, i.e. expectations of more money. Social reward. Expectation that there will be social benefits to the helper, e.g. fame, gratitude, reciprocity. Cost of the victim receiving no help. Relating to concern for the victim. Victim deservingness. Victim seen as innocent or not responsible for the problem. Victim need. The situation involves a serious need for the victim, e.g. severe injury or psychological problem. Clarity of victim's need. The need of the victim is unambiguous and it is unlikely to be misinterpreted, e.g. the situation involves screams for help. Relating to personal concerns. The costs. Guilt or blame. Anticipated negative outcomes for not helping, e.g. the possibility of being publicly identified as someone who failed to help a person in need. Potential irresponsibility. Bystander has clear responsibility, e.g. personally identified as responsible, in position of responsibility, such as a group leader. Unpleasant arousal. Feelings of upset and distress associated with witnessing another person suffer.